Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Manchester is Red podcast from the Manchester Evening News. My name is George Smith and alongside me is Steven Railston. Steven, how are you doing?
Very well, George. Played at in the Old Trafford media game yesterday. It was the MUFC media team against the journalists. The first year we haven't disgraced ourselves, which was very good. I believe it was 2-2 in the end. Sam Homewood scored both goals for our side, which was a bit controversial because last year he played for United's team. He had legs, so thankfully we could send him through, and he had a bit of pace. I did the free peak challenge at the weekend, George, which was did that in 23 hours and 35 minutes. You can imagine my legs were quite sore on Monday morning, but I still battled through. I think I played around 55 minutes to an hour, which I was impressed with. So yeah, I was happy with my performance in the end. So very enjoyable and always a huge privilege to play at Old Trafford.
So essentially, you've come back to work for a rest then, really?
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
But yeah, I did notice that you'd been in action, got to grace the Old Trafford pitch yesterday. So memories created there for you, Steve, I'm sure. One thing ticked off the bucket list.
We obviously played last year. There was a lot of former pros playing last year, so it kind of influenced the dynamic. I mean, we had them on our team and we're still lost, but it was way more competitive this year, way more enjoyable because of that. We had Mickey Gray, who's a bit of a ringer, but he does a lot of work. He covers United for TalkSport. He's obviously former Premier League footballer, and it is a bit surreal when you're telling them where to be or what he should be doing. Telling a former Premier League footballer what to do. Yeah, interesting.
Well, good times. But before we dive into the main crux of this podcast, we must offer a shout out to our podcast sponsor, Saily, which is a brand owned by NordVPN that is a new eSIM service app that you can use abroad if you're in desperate need of an internet connection. You can download Saily in your app store and use code Manchester at checkout to get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. For more information, please go to our description box after this video. So with the formalities out of the way, Stephen will dive into the topic that we're here for, and that is obviously Manchester United. Transfers is still the main talking point. It seems weird sitting here on the 10th of June saying it's deadline day. It's a bit weird this year with the Club World Cup taking place. It's kind of got a mid-window deadline, if you like, at 7 p.m. this evening. Unless anything happens that we're not aware of, United are not going to be doing anything before the window temporarily closes this evening. But in all honesty, a week or so into the window, I think United will be pretty chuffed with what they've been able to achieve. Cunha through the door, seemingly making progress on getting Mbeumo in. So if you'd have offered a United fan that last Sunday morning, they'd snap your hand off, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I've asked the question. I'm just waiting on a response, but the expectation is that there's very slim chance of anything being announced on or communicated in any direction on Mbeumo today. Of course, that could change. We're recording in the morning. It's Tuesday morning, isn't it? I've lost track of my days. Haven't been up the mountains like a mountain goat. But yeah, it's been a very good start, as you said, George. We obviously discussed the Cunha deal on the last podcast when we were on. I think you've done one with Ty, haven't you, since then? And of course, obviously, they've launched the bid for Brian Mbeumo of Brentford. Subsequently, I think obviously around 45 million with 10 million pounds in add-ons, which has fallen short of Brentford's expectations. That's no surprise, really. It's probably going to take around 65 to 70, perhaps, to get Mbeumo across the line. He's obviously a proven Premier League player, just like Cunha, which is why I'm such a big fan of these transfers. I think they should be excellent additions if they can obviously pull off the Mbeumo deal. I've been really fond of Mbeumo for a long time, actually. I mean, he was excellent in the Championship with Brentford, who there's a lot of talk of expected goals on this podcast, and Samuel obviously doesn't like them, but Brentford were basically the Championship's biggest XG performers for a long time before their promotion. For around 2 seasons, their XG pointed at them being promoted. They were obviously eventually promoted, and they're all heavily into their data at that football club. That's how they sign players, and that's how they have success with their transfers, and Mbeumo was one of those. And just I've said there was no expectation today on Mbeumo. I'm just going to message through that. Yeah, there's slim chances today. So there you go. There's confirmation on that. But again, not expecting anything today. But look, it's a transfer. Something could happen. I suppose anything can happen. Back to Mbeumo. Yeah, in the Premier League, fantastic season. And I think they've obviously Brentford and Mbeumo have kind of been the perfect match for each other. They've kind of come up together and they've developed together. And Mbeumo's established himself in the top flight, and Brentford have done that as a Premier League club as well. And he's been hugely pivotal in that success. And it just feels inevitable that now he's going to have a bit of a, I don't want to be disrespectful to Brentford, but a bigger move, quote unquote, bigger move. And it's interesting to see he's obviously been linked with Tottenham in the last few days, who are closing in on Thomas Frank, having sacked Ange Postecoglou of the Europa League final. And whether that will change anything at all, I personally doubt it, because Mbeumo has indicated that he wants to move to Manchester. So I don't think that will. But again, I probably just want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's certainly gonna create headlines, which it already is doing. It was inevitable once the Thomas Frank to Tottenham links started, and obviously it does look like that managerial move is going to happen. But like you said there, Stephen, Mbeumo's got his heart set on Old Trafford. He wants the move, similar to Matheus Cunha. They've both wanted to make this switch, and that's going to give United an added incentive to try and get it done. But you make a good point about Mbeumo, about how he's become established in the Premier League. Him and Cunha, between them since the beginning of the 23-24 season. 56 Premier League goals between them. Remarkable return for mid-table clubs, shall we say. Obviously, Wolves have flirted with relegation a little bit in that time. But Mbeumo, when he first came into Brentford in the Championship from France, formed that formidable front three with Ollie Watkins, Saïd Benrahma, and those two obviously established themselves pretty well in the Premier League as well. So Brentford have been the perfect example, similarly, perhaps from a lower base in comparison to Brighton, of plucking gems and then selling them on for bigger fees. But as we've seen with others, it's been a recipe for success. And we've both said many times in both on this podcast, written work, that we'd like to see United go for established Premier League ready players.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of shift in policy, isn't it, I suppose? Because when you look at Dan Ashworth, he was probably, when he was looking at alternatives to Eric Ten Hag, he was probably going up that avenue when he was looking at Premier League proven managers, and they actually took a different direction. And obviously Ashworth left the club, but now with their recruitment, they are heading into that direction again, whether looking to sign Premier League proven players. It's low risk, isn't it? But it does come at a higher cost. These players aren't going to come cheaply, because Premier League clubs have money. They don't really need to sell. And obviously the stock of these players are incredibly high. So that's why Wolves could, well, obviously Cunha had a release clause, which helped, but they negotiated that in his new contract for 62.5 million. And now Mbeumo, Brentford are in a good position with the PSR. I think financially they're all right. So they don't necessarily have to sell Mbeumo. He's obviously got a year left on his contract. They've got the option of another year. So essentially he's got 2 years left on his deal. So that's obviously gives them some bargaining power in negotiation. So yeah, they can hold out for a bit, but I do think this is one that should get done because of the players' desire, and he's obviously indicated that he would like to move. How long it will take is another matter. You'd like to think by the end of June, again, because that's an important PSR deadline, June 30th, and United will intend to get it over the line before then. But as you said, we're in this weird situation, aren't we, where this transfer window is closing and then opening again for this stupid Club World Cup, which is absurd. No one's going to watch, are they? I'm
certainly not. I've got no aspirations, no ambitions to watch it, but it is what it is, and we soldier on. But realistically then, Stephen, if Mbeumo does get across the line, he comes in, the general expectation is that he's going to occupy that right-sided number 10 spot, with Cunha expected to play in the left position of that role. All of a sudden, it looks like a potentially very formidable attack. And obviously, there is one position in the middle of those two that still needs to be filled, and we'll come on to that. But for Mbeumo, if he was to come in, the likelihood is Amass goes to right wing back. You've got a very exciting potential partnership down that right flank with goals, pace, creativity. And all of a sudden, United have gone from being a team bereft of attacking ideas to potentially one of the best in the league, certainly on paper.
It's funny, isn't it? Because that's, as you said, on paper, that was the important thing to say. I mean, it could potentially go from having one of the worst attacks in the Premier League to having, on paper, one of the most exciting attacks. And I think other clubs will be looking around and be quite envious, actually, of the business United are looking to do at the start of this window, especially after the season they had in 15th and losing in the Europa League final. To make such a strong start to the window is incredibly encouraging. United scored 44 goals in the Premier League last season. Absolutely abysmal, just so toothless. I think Mbeumo and Cunha scored, is it 37?
35, I think.
35,
37 overall.
I remember I noted it in an article the other day, but as I said, I've been off for a few days. So there you go. What's that? Nine for you. I mean, that's remarkable, isn't it? For two players to kind of get so close to a full team's output. It's probably a good reflection on both of them, and it shows how well they performed last season. And it does not do this current crop of players any favours, and it highlights how bad and toothless they've been, really. So they should really add some cutting edge to that side, which is needed. And again, really encouraging, because we've all seen what the biggest problem on the pitch is this season. United cannot put the ball in the back of the net. and they're looking to address that. A striker would obviously be the icing on the cake, wouldn't it, alongside those two? And you're right, it's interesting again to see how it affects the rest of the squad, because Amad has played in that position. Garnacho is set to leave, obviously, who is kind of operated in that left-sided role. You'd imagine Amad would play at right wing back. I was kind of making the argument to move him there permanently before his ankle injury. I just thought there was more creativity on the pitch. It would allow if Amad played there, and you can have another number 10 in that position. But that would obviously mean having someone more defensive-minded on the left. And is Patrick Dorgu defensively good enough to kind of cover Amad? So there's a lot of moving parts, and the midfield needs to be right. Again, where does that leave Ugarte and Menu, as we discussed on the last podcast? There's a lot of questions, isn't there, to be answered in the next 6 weeks or so leading up to pre-season.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts in all of this, and it's impossible at this point to say, isn't it, what this squad is going to look like. And Amorim's already accepted the squad doesn't need to be as big with no European football next season. There's been a lot of free and clear midweeks to spend on the training ground. So United could play as few as 40 games next season if they crash out of the League Cup and the FA Cup at the first hurdle. So it could be, in that sense, a scenario where it's good collectively, but there could be individuals struggling for game time. But you raised a good point there about Amad moving to right wing back. I remember Ruben Amorim, and I actually found the quotes out yesterday. I dug them out, where he said that he could imagine Amad long-term playing in that wing back role, preferring, though, at that point when he had to move forward, wanting a left footer in that right side number 10 position. So Mbeumo is a perfect fit. He had goals. He's got pace, power, aggression. So really, if Mbeumo comes in, it feels like that partnership could well be set in stone. And where does that leave someone like Mason Mount, who obviously Amorim adores? You said last week he loves him. There could be some players there that are struggling for game time, but you've got to think of the team rather than individuals, haven't you?
Yeah, and I mean, can any of these players, can you protect any of these players that have been part of this absolutely abysmal season? No. When we've talked about kind of what the squad might look like in the new season, none of these players deserve to be protected. None of these players deserve to have their positions in the team safeguarded. Everything is up for grabs after finishing 15th in the Premier League. They were shocking. They need to be replaced, is the bottom line, essentially. That's going to take time. There's obviously players who need to be kept, and there's players who will play a part of successful teams going forward. But the majority of the dressing room, I think everyone would agree, fell incredibly short of the club's high standards and aren't good enough, and have shown that, unfortunately. Look, there's probably around 10 players, maybe that's a stretch, that you'd say should be kept and can play a part in a really successful side. You just mentioned Mason Mount there. Yeah, there's been peaks and troughs, hasn't there? I think with Mount, obviously, his fitness record has been a bit concerning, but he kind of got the fitness there at the end of the season. Some promising performances, his 2 goals in the semi-finals against Bilbao at Old Trafford, and the Europa League, of course. Great goals from the halfway line. That was a brilliant strike. But then the Europa League final, I don't know, he just wasn't that good, was he?
Well, nobody was, to be fair.
Well, yeah, I was going to say bad performance. It probably was a bad performance. I was going to describe it as indifferent, but it wasn't great. So that was disappointing. But you're right. Yeah, I don't think anyone really had a good game. Fernandes was off it that night, wasn't he? And Amad, and they were the biggest creative outlets. So that's why they lost. But yeah, the bottom line is I don't think any of these players can have complaints if they have competition and they lose their places, because they have just been part of a shocking season.
Yeah, they have. And I think most people have got a list in their mind of the players they'd realistically like to see the club try and move on this. So we know there's a few that the club are actively going to try and shift. Marcus Rashford, Sancho, Garnacho, Antony. Then obviously there's a little bit of few question marks of the likes of Casemiro. Would anybody want to take Luke Shaw with his injury record? We know the pattern. We know what the likelihood is of certain players moving on. But moving on, Stephen, looking at that elusive number 9 spot, we know it's the position that United simply have to strengthen this summer, come what may, however they do it. Liam Delap's been and gone. It seems like there's 2 or 3 names now that are just continuously bubbling away, such as Victor Osimhen, Viktor Gyökeres, been a few links with Jonathan David. So it does feel like there is an expectation that it could be one of those 3. We don't know what's going to happen. Sales are going to dictate what's possible. But over the last 24 hours, there's been quite a lot of rumours again linking Gyökeres, being reports that he's not happy with the sporting hierarchy for increasing their valuation of him. But to me, this is a gut feeling. This isn't on any sort of intel or inside knowledge. It's just a gut feeling. I think it could be destined that Viktor Gyökeres is the striker they end up with this summer, but it could take a while to get everything done.
It would be a brilliant addition. I mean, the 2 names Gyökeres and Osimhen would be the leading candidates, wouldn't they? We discussed their goal scoring records on the last podcast. I mean, Osimhen, clearly the issue there is the wage demands. His move to Chelsea collapsed at the 11th hour last summer because of his wage demands. That's obviously why he ended up at Galatasaray. Antonio Conte decided that he wasn't part of his plans at Napoli, so they needed to ship him out, and that's why he ended up in the Turkish division. In this summer, it looks like the same with Osimhen. I think there's been reports, hasn't there, of failing to agree terms with Al Hilal. Again, I've been up the mountains, so I'm not sure, like a mountain goat, I'm not sure what the latest is on that. But if Al Hilal are thinking your demands are too much, then bloody hell, Victor, what are you asking for? It makes me, football was way simpler, wasn't it, 20 years ago? You think back to Paul Gascoigne joining Tottenham over United, and he famously got persuaded to join Tottenham over joining Sir Alex Ferguson because a sunbed and a car for his dad was thrown into the deal, and he thought, that'll do for me. So he moved down south and joined Tottenham instead of going to Old Trafford. He probably would have been on the straight and narrow a bit more if he'd moved to United over Tottenham. Anyways, that's a different story. But yeah, it just goes to show you, isn't it? I mean, Osimhen's demands are clearly very, very high, and United have lowered the wage bill since Ineos have kind of gained control of football operations, and they've deliberately brought that down, and players who are signed now are offered lower wages. They still pay good money, and that's why players will obviously want to move, along with the prestige of the club. It still obviously means something, which again is encouraging after such a bad season. They can still sign and really big players and be attractive to the likes of Bremo and Kuna. But yeah, for that reason, it's starting to feel that Gyökeres is probably more realistic. I'd agree with that. But Arsenal might be the elephant in the room. They've been heavily linked with him as well. They need a striker. A striker really feels like the missing piece of their jigsaw. Whereas at United, it's just a missing piece. There's probably 12 missing pieces, isn't it? In a huge jigsaw. There's the box is scattered on the floor and it's broken, but Arsenal's is a bit more complete, and it just needs finishing with a centre forward. So if you Gyökeres and you get offered Arsenal or United, objectively you would probably have to sign for Arsenal because of the position they're in. Champions League football in the Premier League, competing for Premier League titles. They're further ahead, and they are where Amram wants to be in a few years. But Amram knows Gyökeres, and he has that up his sleeve, so that could be hugely decisive as well in potential negotiations.
Yeah, that could be the key attraction, couldn't it? That relationship he's got with Ruben Amorim, and his record under him at Sporting, both before and then after Amorim left to go to Old Trafford, has just been exceptional. I mean, 97 goals in 102 games. It's Haaland level numbers. It's absolutely sensational. I know a lot of people will point out that the Portuguese.
George, you need to be careful. You need to be careful with your Haaland comparisons, because you know the last striker who was compared to Haaland?
Go on.
Rasmus Højlund. I don't know why he was there. It was just a Scandinavian link.
That worked out well, didn't it?
There was some strange comparisons with Højlund and Haaland before he signed.
But I think obviously a lot of people will point out on Gyökeres' figures that the Portuguese top flight, with respect, is not as difficult as, say, the Premier League is. But I just think ultimately, if we're going to argue about how some leagues are more difficult than others, this, that, and the other, who do you go for? Because Liam Delap would have been an enormous gamble again, like Rasmus Højlund, Joshua Zirkzee. But Gyökeres' figures over the last 2 seasons prove that he is a reliable goal scorer. He's done it on the international stage with Sweden as well. So I just think there becomes a point where people get so hooked up on sort of, will he do this for style of play? Can he do it in this league? Ultimately, strikers are judged on goals, and he scores goals, and his record is there for everybody to see. Completely
agree. His profile just seems right, doesn't it? I mean, United need to sign someone of that profile. Late 20s. I made the point last season on a podcast with Samuel, and I actually went through the Premier League top goal scorers. It might have been, I don't know, maybe in March time or April time. And the top 10, with the exception of Cole Palmer, I believe, were aged from 25 onwards. So, I mean, it's very difficult for a young striker to kind of, in the Premier League, to have really, really high output, I think, and to consistently do that. It has to be a really special player. Look at like a Wayne Rooney, for example, that kind of player. Strikers kind of come into the run, I think, in the late 20s, and yeah, Gyökeres and Osimhen both tick that box. Gyökeres again has previous experience of playing across here. Obviously, his time at Brighton wasn't a success, but his time at Coventry was, and the Championship is not an easy division. And you look at the players that have come out of the Championship actually in the last 5 or 10 years, and it has been a really good breeding ground for a lot of excellent talent. I think it's quite an underrated division, and I think if top Premier League clubs signed players in the Championship more often, instead of allowing kind of lower Premier League clubs to sign those players, develop them, and then sell them for big bucks, that would be maybe an intelligent strategy. But again, as we always make this point, the demands are different at the bigger clubs like United. You need a demand. You need to hit the ground running straight away. If you join Crystal Palace, for example, like Adam Wharton from Blackburn, you're allowed time to thrive and develop. If he's thrown into United, is he going to take his game to that level at that speed? Probably not, because of the weight of expectation and the scrutiny. So it's horses for courses, isn't it? It's a bit different.
That is the thing, isn't it? Obviously, Premier League clubs have all got demands, but at United, they are tenfold to most. We know that they are exceptionally high standards that are set. But you raised a good point there about Championship talent stepping up in recent years. And I think the one that comes to my mind most often in terms of scoring goals at a regular rate has been Jarrod Bowen. From Hull City to West Ham, being a consistent source of goals. Ollie Watkins, wasn't all that long ago. He was playing in League Two with Exeter, went to Brentford, then obviously went on to Aston Villa. Ivan Toney as well, playing League One with Peterborough. Harry Kane, many moons ago, was on loan in League One with Leyton Orient, and that's not worked out so bad. So, yeah, you've got to make your step up at some point. Not everybody can do it, but there has been improved examples of players doing so. And I think
Gyökeres is the latest, isn't he, George? Because he's gone on to do that. And like you say, they need someone with that goal scoring record. They need someone who is the closest guarantee to goals they can find. And at the moment in the market, it's Gyökeres and Osimhen.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it, with Viktor Gyökeres? For me, in my opinion, as you know, Stephen, I'm a bit of a Championship nerd. I'm obsessed with the division. I support a team in the division. But 2 seasons ago, before he joined Sporting Lisbon, Gyökeres, in my opinion, was the best striker outside the Premier League in this country. He was exceptional. Pace, power, aggression, all types of goals, box movement. And now, all of a sudden, he's gone from being a player that was sold for about £22 million to being arguably the most sought-after striker in Europe with an unbelievable record. For me, it's just a natural fit. He knows the system Amorim wants to play. He knows him. And if you're bringing in a player like Bryan Mbeumo, in addition to Cunha, to play with him, he's got some unbelievable firepower to go alongside him. You've still got Bruno Fernandes, Ahmad, Mason Mount potentially as well, if he can stay fit. You've got a lot of talent there that can create and supply.
And if he needs persuaded, if it's between Arsenal and United, Ruben can just say, well, I'll throw in a sunbed in the car, and I'm sure that'll get the deal done. Gyökeres will move to United, yeah.
That might convince him. We shall see. But it's going to be interesting, isn't it, to see what happens on this striker search. And I've actually done a piece on it this morning, sort of looking at how it would be nice if they could get a striker in before they head on the pre-season tour, because you think about last year, Højlund got injured in the first game. The season before, he didn't arrive until the tour was finished. Zirkzee didn't go on the tour last year because of commitments with the Netherlands at the Euros, was granted an additional break. So United have not had a striker in position for a full pre-season for a few years now. So it would be nice. But of course, the elephant in the room is getting sales over the line and raising funds, because I think we're all agreed that if they get this Mbeumo deal done, that will be it until additional funds are brought in via sales. Yeah,
and you've got 3 really good sales that you can kind of push through, really, with obviously Rashford, Antony and Sancho, and that should at least make up 100 million, you'd like to think. Real Betis obviously would like to sign Antony. I just think that's obvious that they probably won't permanently, because they probably won't have the money, unfortunately. It always seems to be the case when United's players go on loan and succeed in these instances, and the club are like, oh, fantastic, we want to keep them, but we can't afford. Well, pay up. You've got to pay the price for what they're worth. And I think it's the money they need for Antony. I think it's 35 million. It might just be a little bit less than that to prevent a loss in the books for PSR. So, look, on the form that he showed for Real Betis, I think he's definitely worth that, considering I know they're grossly overpaid, but you've got to kind of factor in his last few years, how badly he's underperformed. But still, I think he is worth around 35 million. The upside he's shown out in Spain, I couldn't believe it, really. I was watching, I can't remember if it was his last game, one of his last games before the Conference League final. He cut inside in the last minute and he scored to go 2-1 up. It was a bored Sunday night watching that match, and it was just stunning. And I think, where's this Antony been? It's remarkable, really. But there's plenty of reasons why he's chalk and cheese, really. We'll not get into those for a different podcast. But yeah, you're right. Sales will be key to that, and they should raise a decent amount of those 3 pairs.
Yeah, you'd like to think so. And obviously, Garnacho as well could attract a handsome fee if they can find a buyer for him. Obviously, Napoli had a 40 million bid turned down in January, but you'd expect for somebody of his quality and potential upwards of 50 easily. So we'll see what happens on that one. But on the subject of exits, Stephen, the retain list dropped yesterday. No major surprise. We all knew that the three senior players that are departing were going to be listed in Victor Lindelof, Johnny Evans, and Christian Eriksen. They'll all officially leave at the end of June. Tom Heaton's been offered a new deal. Talks are ongoing over him, which Tyrone Marshall did report a few weeks back was possible. A few youngsters, though, are departing. A few of them you reported a few weeks back that they were going to be on their way, Jack Kingdom being one of them. So no real surprise in the form of the retain list, to be truthful.
Yeah, no real surprises. Obviously, we knew Eriksen and Lindelof were heading out at the end of their contracts, and they all said goodbye on the final day of the season. Tom Heaton, a really good character around the place. It's a bit of a cliche, but he is. He's a good role model. He's very hands-on as well with the young players at Carrington. And I think there's been a bit of a surprise that he hasn't played more often, actually. He's only made a handful of appearances for the club. Made his debut in the Champions League, of course, under Ralf Rangnick, was finally given that kind of first appearance, having come through the academy and leaving and having a really good career with Burnley, etc., and other football clubs. So yeah, it'd be good to see him tied down for another year. That kind of boxes that off, but I still think there'll be more change to the goalkeeping department, potentially Bayendale leaving. And like I say, I think Heaton should have played a few more times over Bayendale, who has not been convincing. Regarding the youngsters, I mean, there's names on that list. I always say this on this podcast when we're discussing these academy players that the majority of fans listening to this podcast wouldn't have heard of. I think I was a little bit surprised at Jack Kingdom leaving. He'd just been on loan at Rochdale, helped them to the conference playoffs. It's called the National League, isn't it? The National League playoffs. So he had a really good loan spell. I've kind of heard why that happened, and I think the club's kind of financial situation has affected certain things with certain players going forward, whereas in the past they may have been offered new deals. So just an interesting one that, but it's obviously points towards kind of different strategy. Maybe players will now be let go sooner than they would have. That's academy products, I should say, going forward. So just one to bear in mind as well.
Yeah, there's no real shocks on that list. Young Ashton missing as well, been offered a new deal, so we'll see if anything plays out on that one. But Stephen, on the subject of youngsters, you are our resident academy expert. Is there any youngsters that you look at? You see a lot of the under-18s, the 21s that you've seen this season. Is there any players that stand out in your mind that United should be actively looking to try and get out on a loan move this summer to try and develop their progress and speed up their development?
Yeah, well, I spoke to Travis Binion after one of the games, I think in May, and we were discussing loans, and it's really interesting because when loans don't go well, the club will still say, look, there's no such thing as a bad loan. And I do understand that to some extent because it teaches these players where they are and what they need to do, and it might give them a reality check of where they are on their journey, and it tells them a lot about themselves. And so basically, even if they don't play and a loan can look bad from the outside, it can still be very helpful. And without that first loan, for example, a player can then might not have a good second loan. So there's plenty of instances. You kind of look at Rhys Bennett, who went to Stockport 18 months ago, didn't play, didn't have a kick, was never in the squad, but he actually enjoyed it and said it was good for him because he was around the squad, he was around the first team. And then he went to Fleetwood last season or this season, I don't know, when's the changeover? Probably last season. And he had a really good year. So without that first loan at Stockport, he wouldn't have had that second. I expect more players to be kept in the building, dare I say, in the new season. From what I've heard, there's talks ongoing. I've spoken to a few people in the last 2 weeks, and the young players are in the kind of the process now. Obviously, the end of the season has come around. They're in talks about what's next, and their agents will basically sit down with the club, with Nick Cox, with Jason Wilcox, with all the appropriate kind of staff members, with Travis Binion, and they'll discuss the kind of next steps and what might lie ahead. An interesting one is Harry Amass, of course. He was due to speak, I think, in the next 2 weeks around with club staff, and kind of discuss what might be next, because obviously you've got Patrick Dorgu there at left back. You've got Diego Leon, who's coming in. I expect him to go into the academy straight away. So that might be on Amram to decide whether he wants Amass to be around the first team squad and kept in there, or whether to send him out on loan. He did really well, Amass, in the last 3 months. Obviously made his debut against Leicester in March, and showed he could cut it in the Premier League and look comfortable in difficult circumstances. It's not easy to throw a young player in such a struggling side, and he coped very well, I thought. So I think the kind of players who are close to the first team, I think will be kept in. And I think the players who might not necessarily be as close to the first team will be sent out on loan. I think that's the kind of approach they'll take. So if you do see myself or anyone else reporting that the talks for a player, just kind of keep that in mind, because I think that's the kind of way it's going to develop in the next 2 months. But again, I could be wrong. We'll see what happens. But from conversations and what I've been told, I think that's the approach they'll take.
Yeah, and things can change quickly in the market. We know that, of course. And I think on Harry Amass, personally, I would be inclined to keep him around the first team squad. I know, obviously, pre-season, very, very different pace of games and all of that. But I thought last summer he was probably the standout player in pre-season for United. I thought he had some really good performances over in the US. He had to wait far too long for his debut. Should have come a lot sooner, I thought, his competitive debut. But when he did get his chances, he looked very assured, very comfortable. And on the presumption Luke Shaw stays and plays as a centre-half, Amass could find himself, if he plays his cards right, as Patrick Dorgu's deputy.
Well, that's why I didn't even mention Luke Shaw. And when I had a conversation last week about Amass, Shaw's name wasn't mentioned, because everyone's kind of seen Shaw as the left-sided centre-half now. Yeah. In that kind of situation. So yeah, it's kind of Leon and Dorgu who are at left back. Obviously Dalot can play there. He prefers to play on the right. To the sign a new right wing back. I'd like to think so. And maybe Dalot competes there and covers at left back. So, but you're right, I'd like to see Amass kept around the first team as well. I think there's definitely merit in that. You mentioned it took a while for him to make his debut. It did, and it must have been so frustrating for him. No young player, of course, is entitled to make a debut, but Amass couldn't have done much more in pre-season. And then he was taken down to Wembley for the Community Shield. And if you remember, George, against Barnsley in the Carabao Cup, the early rounds, Toby Collier, Eric Ten Hag, he played Collier at left back. So he played Collier out of position. And didn't give Amass his debut. And I think at that point, Amass must have been scratching his head and thinking, what have I got to do to get into this team? And that must have been really frustrating. And I think, to be honest, that might have been the moment, because they started to prepare him to go out on loan. They placed him on a kind of a muscle conditioning program, and he notably bulked up in those months leading up to the winter window. But an appropriate offer didn't arrive. He stayed in the building, and then he made his debut. So that was kind of vindication of that decision in the end.
Yeah, the Barnsley decision was very odd, I must admit. You looked at that team sheet and you just felt sorry for Harry Amass, to be fair. And that's not a criticism of Toby Collier, because he's another young player with a lot of potential.
It's a criticism of Eric Ten Hag.
He's not a left back.
and obviously playing Amari Forson over Ahmad as well, and playing Mazraoui in the number 10 position. So, yeah, some baffling selections.
There was some very interesting times in that era. But on the subject of loans, again, Stephen, in terms of how you quite rightly pointed out that not every loan is a success. I think we saw a prime example of that this season, last season, whatever you want to call it, 24-25 campaign, of Ethan Wheatley going to Walsall. He'd obviously made his debut for the senior team. He'd been in and around that for a while, done quite well for the 21s, goes to Walsall, who at that point are seemingly storming their way towards the League Two title. And you think, yeah, this is a good opportunity for him. They've just lost a young striker called Nathan Lowe, who was on loan at Stoke. He's gone back. Wheatley will go in. He barely got a kick of the ball and ended up back at Carrington a lot sooner than anticipated and played no part in the playoffs. So it just goes to show that not every loan can be a success, but it can be an enormous learning curve.
There's so much that goes into making a loan a success, isn't there? There's so many, again, different moving parts. There's so many different deciding factors. Does the player get on with the manager? Is the player settled? Does the manager play the right system? Is there enough quality in the team? Is the support system right? Is the environment right? There's so many different factors, really. Obviously, every case is unique and different. In Wheatley's case, at Walsall was interesting. Unfortunately, he didn't play. United would have liked to see him play a lot more, of course. And then he came back and he played a few under-21s at the end of the season. And look, he reminded everyone of kind of sent a reminder of, look, I'm back. This is who I am, and this is what I can do, because he was excellent in those games in the kind of the Premier League 2 playoff matches. He was on target a few times, and he looked strong. He looked athletic. Bearing in mind he hadn't played, so he was short of match fitness, and considering that, he did very well. One of the games he was gesturing to come off around 70 minutes. He continued, I think, around 85 against West Ham in the quarterfinals. And again, Travis Binion praised him and just said, look, don't write this lad off, because he's got a lot of talent. Travis Binion once said to me that if you could draw a perfect number 9, he would look like Ethan Wheatley. So that says a lot, doesn't it? It's a huge compliment, that, and he does have all the attributes. This summer's important. He needs to take his chance in pre-season as far as his first team potential is concerned anyways, because there is an opening there, and if he can impress Amram, there might be a chance. But if not, I'd imagine it'd be another loan, and then it'd be interesting to see how it develops after that.
Yeah, and the thing is, he's only 19. He doesn't turn 20 until January. He's still young. He's still very raw. And like you said there, another loan, it could be really beneficial for him. He might find the right club who do think, yeah, we can make this guy who we believe he can be. He could be the main man for us at lower levels. So a League One, League Two loan, who knows? And we discussed him last week on the podcast, Dango, another one who's not had much luck on temporary loan deals. Obviously, horrific injury luck at Port Vale and then at Rotherham. But he's another player. Obviously, contract situation might implicate things for him. But he's another one that United may think, yeah, we'll try again, find him at the right club. If he can stay fit, we know there's a really exciting young player in there.
I still have a sliver of hope for Dango regarding his first team prospects. But the truth is he's running out of time. 1 year left on his deal. He's had bad luck with injuries. Can he do enough this summer to convince? I mean, look, there's people within the football club who think the world of him, and they know he's had such bad luck with injuries. So he'll be looked after in that sense. And I could see him potentially getting a new deal. But again, with the way the club's going, and they're maybe being a bit more careful and rethinking contract decisions, whereas in the past, I don't know how to word it, maybe hand them out a bit more willy-nilly is unfair. That's not what I'm trying to say. But they're really considering things now and looking at every nook and cranny and giving things a bit more of consideration. I'd say that's probably the way to word it. And Go, again, yeah, really interesting to see how that develops, because a really high-quality player, and he obviously went to Rotherham. He could easily go to a championship side, I think, spend 2 years at a championship club and end up in the Premier League, and then eventually maybe end up at a mid-table, higher-end Premier League club, and for a decent fee. He's got that kind of ability.
Yeah, and we've seen prime examples, haven't we, of numerous players at various top Premier League clubs not quite making the grade there, but making a name for them elsewhere. And the prime example, one of them is currently who's in the news, James Trafford. Didn't quite make the grade at Man City, went out on loan to Bolton, did well, sold to Burnley, and now Newcastle having a serious look at him this summer. So it just goes to show that it's not the end of the road if you don't make it at a club like United, a City, a Liverpool, etc. But Stephen, just to wrap this podcast up, I'll allow you to just talk us through a little bit more of your trip to Old Trafford yesterday, played in the media game, just to offer us a peek behind the curtain. You, Samuel and Stephen gracing the Hallow Turf. Was that your first time doing that?
It was my second time. I played last year, but I will say, George, before I get into that a bit more, my background here behind this, I'm not in Abbey Road. I'm not in a recording studio. It's actually it's not my office. It does look like it's all the records in the back, and there's even a sword. I've come to visit my dad for the weekend. He's a bit eccentric, as you can tell by the background in the video. But yeah, the football match, it was, like I say, really, really competitive, really enjoyable. Joe Nelson, who works for United's media team, he scored twice for them, and Sam Homewood, as I mentioned in the first part, scored our goals. Because my legs were so dodgy, I asked to start on the bench, which is a bit questionable, isn't it? You don't ask to start on the bench. I came on around 25 minutes, filled in at centre half, then moved to right wing back, I believe, and played centre midfield. You do realise when you play centre midfield that it does take a lot more legs, and it's very sobering playing at Old Trafford, because look, we sit on this podcast and we discuss players' performances. Fans discuss players' performances. We all do. It's the business we're in. But when you're on that pitch, it does give you a reminder of the task they face. The pitch feels a lot bigger for some reason than a normal 11-a-side pitch. Old Trafford, it just does. I think because of the stands, and you look around and you see the stands. But again, an incredible privilege. There was some tourists actually having a stadium tour at one point, and they were watching the game. So that's as far as we got, is having spectators watching us. So I don't think there's the footage. I think they have CCTV. I think Manchester City, when they have their press game, they actually clip it up and do proper footage. But I think the CCTV available of the goals, which I think one of them is circulating at the moment, of Sam Homewood's equaliser. I think Laurie Whitwell played him through with a clever assist. And do you know what? I'll give a shout out to Michael Gibson, who is on United Comms, because he did one of the most insane touches I think I've ever seen, actually. I was on the bench at that point, and the ball comes down. I don't know how to describe it. He touched it under his leg and laid it off, and it would have been one of the most sublime assists you've ever seen, but it didn't quite come off, thankfully. He was on the opposing team, because it was, again, United staff against the journalists. But yeah, it's a fantastic opportunity to play in that game, and it's always really appreciated from us guys. there's obviously bits and pieces on the side as well, some waters and some isotonics and stuff, just to make sure the out of shape journalists don't collapse on the pitch. I think that's probably for health and safety. So yeah, I look forward to it next year, and hopefully we can finally get a win over the MUFC media team, because the journalists still haven't won, but a respectable 2-2 draw.
Well, good to see you, Samuel, and Ty rocking the retro black boots as well. I was very proud of that.
What I will say, so yes, Samuel was playing centre midfield, did a good job, and Ty was in goal. He did brilliantly. I've obviously seen Ty playing goal before, but I was surprised. He was excellent. He was sharing his goalkeeping duties, unfortunately, though, with someone else. And I'll not get into the other goalkeeper's performance too much, but he was at fault for both of the goals. It was Andrew and Honor-esque. So I'll claim a moral victory, because we actually scored goals from like decent goals, well-worked goals, and they scored 2 very rubbish goals. So if Tyrone Marshall had been in goal throughout the entire 90 minutes, it would have been a 2-0 win in my book. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case.
Well, on that cheery note, we'll end this podcast on a high, I think, on that positive note for our colleague Tyrone Marshall. But that does mark the end of this episode of the Manchester is Red podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you may get your podcasts from. Also, make sure to leave a like and maybe a comment as well. We'll be back again later in the week with another episode of the Manchester is Red podcast. So make sure you subscribe for when that drops. Take care and catch you again very soon.